So I'm going to say something about the position of Niuean. A lot of what I'm saying has been known for a long time, but nobody up till now, I think, has sort of looked at the purely linguistic evidence carefully and extensively, and tried to see what we can learn from it. Here's Niue. It's cute map. It's a single island, and it is less than 20 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide. I'm just going to try a different pair of glasses to see if I get better. Oh, really? I sound loud to myself. Okay, let's try it this way. So those are the dimensions of it. It's not close to any other island. This slide shows the distances to some of its nearest neighbors, 400 to 600 kilometers to various islands in West Polynesia, and 500 to 1,000 in some of the Cook Islands, which are its eastern neighbors. Here's a more conventional map, just showing Niue with Western Polynesia and Fiji to give you an idea of its setting. Okay. Niue is a raised coral atoll. It's the largest island of this type in the world, I learned. And you can see here the rugged coastline of Niue, mostly jagged cliffs and so on. There are very few beaches or inviting place to land a canoe. The coast consists mainly of steep cliffs and reef platforms. Here's a pretty amazing picture there. The interior is equally unfriendly. You can grow crops in some places. There's some Niue taro growing. But there are other places that look more like this. So, yeah, I'm going to move that down a bit. All this has implications for the history of settlement and hence the history of language on Niue. Niue was a difficult place to live and probably never supported a very large population. The population in the most recent census that I was able to find was about 1,600 people. It may have been as many as, say, 5,000 at the beginning of the 20th century, but probably not much larger in history. For these reasons, if we compare that with Tongatapu, which is almost exactly the same area, Tongatapu presently has a population of 70,000, but it's a much more amenable place for Polynesian life. Okay, this ruggedness also makes archaeology very difficult, as I will mention later on. Tonga is Niue's closest neighbor. And Tongan and Niuean have a number of features in common that most people have noticed. Almost anyone who's put the two languages side by side would have noticed these things. Someone long ago told me that Tongan speakers who have some acquaintance with Niuean think of it as simplified Tongan. So it would have been apparent to speakers of both languages as well. The special relationship was expressed in terms of a formal subgrouping by Elbert in the 1950s. And there's a simple family tree showing what Elbert suggested in 1953. And he had a Tongic subgroup, including Tongan Niuean, as well as Uvea and Futuna. That's Wallace and Futuna. Polly in 1966 accepted Tongic but reassigned Uvea and Futuna to Nuclear Polynesian. That is the everything else group, sorry. Yeah. So the everything else group is called Nuclear Polynesian for reasons we needn't go into. And the resulting two-language primary subgroup has been the received understanding to this day, and I don't propose to overturn it. Instead, I'll just quickly review the evidence for it and then go on to considering some things that don't fit. Okay, so evidence for Tongic includes loss of Proto Polynesian R, as shown in these few examples here. and more on the handout. So Proto Polynesian had a contrast between L and R, as do most of its closest relatives. But in Polynesian, that contrast has been lost everywhere. In Nuclear Polynesian, the two consonants get merged, and in Tongic, the R drops out, and you only have the L left. And there are plenty of examples of this, including a majority of the basic vocabulary with Proto Polynesian R. A second feature, merger Proto-Oceanic S and H. So this just shows a couple of pairs. The point being made is that Proto Polynesian has S in one and H in the other, in these two cases, initial and medial. In East Futuna, shown over there, you can see that the S remains S and the H drops out, okay? But in Tongan and Niue, the two fall together so that these become, in Niue actually, they become homophones. Sa'i and Hai both become Hai in Niue, and Asu and Ahu both become Ahu in Niue. Okay. So that's another feature shared by Tongan. The actual change involved as an innovation is relatively commonplace. S becoming H has happened in many other Polynesian languages. And the retention of H is not an innovation, but it's still distinctive of that pair of languages. A further change is palatalization of T to ch before the vowel E. Oops. That's it, I think. Yeah. Okay. The earliest records of Tongan and Niuean in the 19th century both show this as ch in the case of Tongan and s in the case of Niuean. So that's the change that they share, but both of them have independently weakened this to just S, so the present pronunciation of these words just has S. Okay. Again, this is a fairly commonplace change, but it doesn't happen exactly the same, in exactly the same way everywhere. Right. Partial assimilation of A to an adjacent high vowel, as in these examples, is shared by Tongan and Niuean. Again, it happens sporadically elsewhere, but nowhere else does it happen as systematically as in those two languages. So ma'unga becomes mo'unga, fafine becomes fefine in Tongan, fifine in Niuean, and so on. This has also, these two languages have also shared a number of morphosyntactic innovations, and perhaps the most conspicuous is these are some other distinctive lexical forms. Am I getting ahead of myself? I think I am. Yeah. These are just odd lexical items that happen to have undergone an unexpected change or a very small regular change in Tongan and Niuean. So you have the treatment of awa sequences in both the word for banyan and the word for spouse. You have the prothesis of V in the word for scratch, which is not found elsewhere. And the metathesis in the case of the word for small, iti becoming ti'i in both languages. Okay, now did I... No, that's okay, that's okay. Oh, I guess I missed the other one out. Never mind. God damn it, it must be here somewhere. I do want to show it. Yeah, here we are. I don't know how it got out of order. This is a very conspicuous feature. That is the te, the specific article, which is pretty much universal in Polynesian, has undergone irregular changes to become either he or e in both Tongan and Niuean, according to conditions we needn't go into, but this just shows a couple of examples of that. Okay, now we're going to go forward here and get to. Now, is this all we can say? No. The Tongic subgroup is not the end of the story, and so I'm going on to say, what else is there in Niuean that isn't explained? Well, of course, Niuean, you won't be surprised to hear, has done plenty of borrowing in recent times. So I've given some examples here of words from English, which Niuean has plenty of. Also, at the time of their conversion to Christianity, they borrowed from Samoan, and also via the missionaries from Latin and Greek and Hebrew, examples of that. And also some non-religious words, let's say, words that weren't directly associated with Christianity, the mission, that did come from Samoan, some of which had previously come from Tahitian. And one thing you can notice is that the Samoan origin of these things is sometimes made obvious by the fact that Niuean has borrowed the original Polynesian K, which is such as in the word for cloth, which would have been kie, as 0, right? Niuean doesn't have a glottal stop, and so that signals a Samoan origin. There's another interesting one in the word for Catholic priests, where you have patele, Samoan patele, but also pakele in Niuean, reflecting the fact that Samoan has both T and K in these words as a result of a fairly recent change in Samoan. Okay, so those are marked out clearly. Now we want to look at some things that are not obviously modern acquisitions. Okay, first we have words where the Proto Polynesian R does not get lost but turns up as L. And these have been observed for a long time. And I'm going to take loss of R as seriously as a real regular sound change. And so a deviation from that will be prima facie evidence that something has come in by a different route. So we have things like to be awake. The Tongan form shows that it's a Proto Polynesian R, so it's regularly lost in Tongan, but Niuean turns up to having ala, okay? Or the branch, Tongan has probably prosthesis of similar to the word for scratch, prosthesis of V for some reason, but Niuean has la for branch, and so on. So there are a fair number of these, but they're only something like 20 or 30% of the R words that I was able to find have this unexpected reflex. Now, in order to confirm that these are in fact borrowings, we might ask whether there are doublets, that is, whether there are words which have come into Niue from two directions, one of which has developed regularly where the R has been lost, and the other which has preserved the L. And indeed there are. So for example, you have the word for to plait, furi, becomes fi in a term for a type of pandanus, which is the best kind for weaving. But the verb to plait is fili. Mui for bottom, back, behind, the usual meanings that muri has, and then muli meaning the last measure of something, and so on. I'll leave you to look through those. So there are a certain number of doublets, clearly showing that these R to L words are intrusive, I would say. I actually think another example may be the word for double canoe, which is faulua in Niuean. I don't know if I had that. I don't know if I've got that on a slide or not, but it's culturally interesting anyway. Okay. Another sound change that might be of some value is the preservation of Proto Polynesian H. It's not an innovation, but it's a characteristic of Niuean and Tongan. So if we find H as becoming 0 or turning up as 0, we might suspect those of being foreign words as well. And there are not only a fair number of these, but some doublets like this. So whakaulu, to open a new house, to launch some project or something, and whakahu compared to whakahu in Tongan. Okay, these aren't the doublets, sorry. These are just examples where Niuean doesn't show the proper Tongic development, okay, and has 0 where Proto Polynesian has H. likewise with the assimilation of the vowels. Now the problem here is that it's not easy to establish the exact conditions under which Tongan and Niuean assimilate these vowels, so we don't have a good baseline for what's regular and what's not, and they may have slightly different conditions as well. So these are just speculative, and I'm not really sure of them, but there are some cases where Niuean fails to assimilate the vowel in a case where Tongan does assimilate it. Okay, now there's another peculiar change that just occurred to me not long ago. Might very well be explained by a contact situation with borrowing involved. So in a few Niuean words we have te for Proto Polynesian S. Fusu turns up. Reflex of fusu is futu, sepo, tepo, and a few others. Now, this could be explained if we assume a Tongic language in Niue would not have had an S phoneme, as you could see. A Tongic, Niuean Tongic, the first intrusion of Tongic into Niue, would share the common Tongic innovation of losing S altogether. Proto Polynesian S is merged with H, okay? So that's at the top there. It's a language with a gap where S should be, all right? On the other hand, if there were a nuclear Polynesian language with which it was in contact and it had retained the S, what would happen when it borrowed words from the nuclear Polynesian language? Well, I suggest that it would actually have turned them into T. And there's actually a modern example of that which seems to be well supported, which is the word for twist tobacco, which should be on the handout there anyway, which is Samoan sai, which turns up in Niuean as tai. So since Niuean still, at least until the 19th century, did not have an S phoneme, apparently they interpreted S as T when they borrowed words. Okay, so those could be further evidence of non-Tongic borrowings. And then there are a couple of just these two distinctive items which undergo some small regular change. That is Proto Polynesian ui becoming iwi in nuclear Polynesian. And here we do have doublets. We have both hui, which means bone or leg in Niuean, and then iwi, which is a fish bone. Kuia to fail of the sight, and whakakiwi to close the eyes, both from original kui, meaning blind. Okay. Now we have to look at quickly at some purely distributional arguments, that is, words which occur in Niuean and in a relatively small group of other languages, either East Polynesian or in the Samoic outlier group. This is the nuclear Polynesian division proposed by Pauli. I put the Samoic outlier in Comic Sans face to indicate that nobody takes it seriously as a subgroup. Even Andy, right from the beginning, admitted that it was problematic. There was no really substantial evidence for it, but it's still a useful category. Even if it doesn't have a real proto-language. And then East Polynesian is the other half of this. So I'm now looking at some words which occur in either this group or this group plus Niuean. So Niuean sort of sticks out. Now there are other ways to explain this kind of distribution, but I think it's at least possible that in some cases it reflects borrowing from these other groups. So there are several here from Samoic outlier cognates, and I've indicated what other languages in the Samoic outlier group have that. Not much to say, except if you're noticing here, you'll see that all along we've been dealing with basically everyday vocabulary and the odd grammatical-like items, such as the prefix soko, hoko there. Okay, I won't go into any detail on these, there's no time. But that's from Samoic outlier. Then if we look at East Polynesian, we find quite a few things that look like East Polynesian words. Some of them also occur in Puka Puka, which is a notoriously heavily borrowed from East Polynesian, and is a kind of stepping stone between East and West, you might say. And some of them also, interestingly, occur in the northern outliers, in keeping with Peter Wilson's current theory about subgrouping, primary subgrouping between East Polynesian and the northern outliers. Okay, I just mentioned that for the interest of those who follow such matters. So there are a bunch of things that look East Polynesian. Okay, now I have to catch up in my script here to what we're going to say about all this. How did all this happen? No. Okay, it looks like we have evidence for some borrowing from an East Polynesian language and some borrowing from Samoic outlier language. I'm assuming direct borrowing from outliers is pretty unlikely, but so it would probably have been one of the languages not too far away from Niue, such as Samoa or Futuna, as a source for these things. But they don't uniformly support a particular source of that kind. The distributions are pretty varied. So there's no smoking gun connecting Niue with any particular other island from which it might have taken a lot of these. And this is one of the reasons that I've come around to thinking more that, in fact, all this borrowing took place in Niue. And it was a matter of languages from different places which had established themselves in Niue and then existed in what somebody mentioned Odwikuo calling egalitarian bilingualism for a long time. And there was a lot of borrowing back and forth, just as there was, to use another comparison, between Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse in England when the Danes settled there. And an amazing amount of English basic vocabulary actually comes from Old Norse, although neither of those people were conquering the other, as it were. They were simply existing side by side and intermarrying and so on. Okay, so maybe we now have a scenario we could live with. So I'm suggesting maybe we should look at Niue in the context of, what I call multistratal languages, of which we have quite a few examples now. Some among the outliers, as you can see there, but also some within the general West Polynesian, Fijian area, like Rotuman, of course, from Bruce Biggs's famous study. And in each case, I've yellowed the language that survives, as it were, the one that's the base that we have to look at now. And as you will see, it can go either way. There's no rule about who becomes the winner, as it were. But lots of these have been verified either through oral tradition or through archaeology, have been confirmed. There's been multiple settlement in these places. So I think Niue needs to be looked at in that light. We have Tongic, we have Samoic, and we have Eastern, and they've all been together in the island. Now, one of the difficulties, this is my little map summing this up, one of the difficulties is that so far I have not found any really good way of deciding which came first. In other words, who got there first? And I don't think you can say that the language that survives has to be either the first arrival or the last. No. I have a few generalities. One is that the Tongic that becomes Niuean, the Proto-Tongic that becomes Niuean, has undergone quite a lot of very particular changes, distinctive changes, all right? That suggests to me that it was not extremely early, all right? On the other hand, East Polynesian didn't even exist back in the day, right? So we probably have a terminus post-quem for East Polynesian before any East Polynesian develops and any East Polynesians could settle in Niue. So that's about as far as I can go. I have here what the archaeologists tell us. This is from Walter and Anderson, 2002. And Niue was settled, they say, quite a long time ago, 2,200 BP. And so there's a lot of time to play around with. And a lot could have happened in those 2,000 years. Niueans don't keep long genealogies, apparently. And their traditional history doesn't talk about a lot of regular contact with other islands. And the archaeology doesn't reveal any obvious sort of influx of new people, although there are some sort of hints. So I just penciled these in to see how it would look, and it looks okay to me with question marks added. Maybe Nuclear Polynesian, and then East Polynesian, and then Tongic last of all. Yeah, okay. I haven't said anything about what I mentioned in my abstract, which was the Motu and Tafiti dialects, but if anybody wants to know about that, you can ask a question about it, okay? That's all.
Donc merci. Pour ceux qui ont des questions, du coup, profitez des 5 petites minutes qui nous restent pour exploiter la fin du diapo.
Thanks, Ross. So just on this last slide, with the colonization period being associated then with a nuclear Polynesian, are you implying then that Niuean is nuclear Polynesian language?
No, I'm saying
okay.
No. I'm okay. Saying that. Well, let me say the first inhabitants of Niue may have been speakers of nuclear Polynesian. Yes. Okay. But I'm not, as I hope I emphasized, I'm not overthrowing Tongic.
Okay.
Niue, as we know it, is a Tongic language.
Okay. Thanks.
Since you prompted me, Ross, could you tell us about Motu and Tafiti?
I'm so glad you asked that. No, I looked at them. Actually, this has excited a lot of people's interest because they are, let's see if I've got this map here. Yeah, there are supposedly 2 dialects of Niuean, one from the north called Motu and one from the south called Tafiti. And the names are suggestive because Motu means island or country, right? And Tafiti actually doesn't mean anything else in Niuean, but in some languages it means people from afar or something like that. You know, so they said, these must have been the original people, and these people came in later, something like that. However, it's very hard to get anything from the linguistic evidence itself. The sum total that I've been able to find of differences between Motu and Tafiti amounts to less than 30 words or pairs of words, which are mostly in McEwen's dictionary. And the differences between them are just all over the place. They just don't suggest anything consistent about origins. I don't even know if these are still spoken or if they're just something that people remembered when the dictionary maker asked them about it, you know. But just to take one example where it's pretty perversely, we have 2 words which have double reflexes in Niuean. Small plural can be iki-iki or liki-liki, all right? The first one looks Tongic, second one looks nuclear Polynesian. To scrape, waru can be either wo or volu, again, Tongic and nuclear. But when we look them up in our dialect atlas, we find that liki-liki is identified as Motu dialect and volu is identified as Tafiti dialect, so I give up. I don't think there's much to be learned from those unless we uncover a lot of better information about them.
Can you go back to the last slides that you had with the 3 periods of colonization?
Oh yeah, I just made that up this morning.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, why would you have the middle period East Polynesian and the late period Tongic? Well, we know that the Tongans had this so-called empire around that time, exactly the 1500. They had this influence, and they conquered Samoa and
Yeah.
other places.
Yeah.
So they would probably correlate better with the influence, the linguistic influence.
No, but these are all BP dates, and so
Yeah, BP dates.
the
yeah.
Tongan Empire was well within the late period, all right, Paul? Paul's an expert on the Tongan Empire. No? It could go earlier.
They could go a little earlier, yeah.
Okay.
So
I wouldn't worry about that. I mean,
No.
there's just lots of room to play around in, so I threw all those in. But the thing about the Samoic and the East Polynesian borrowings is that they don't have any of the specific changes that would link them to a particular. They don't have the Samoan K level stop. They don't have the East Polynesian changes. In fact, some of them don't even have F on rounding to H, which happens almost everywhere in East Polynesia, and so on. So they look much closer to Proto-East Polynesian or Proto-Samoic outlier, if there was such a thing, than to any specific modern language that we know. So to me, they have to be early, but they weren't necessarily brought in through casual contacts with another island. But they may have been there. All along. Yeah.
Une dernière question.
So when you were talking about these languages as being multistratal,
Yeah.
I just wondered if you could just clarify for me, are you proposing this as being like another category of contact languages? And if so, does that mean that you're sort of suggesting that the lack of any predictability about which ones of these languages, these strata, will win out is a function of long-term polylingualism or this egalitarian multilingualism? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting any kind of contact language. I mean, I think these are just normal languages that are borrowing from each other.
But isn't that what a contact language is?
No.
Yeah. No.
I'm
Perhaps
thinking
anyway,
when I hear contact language, I think of Pidgin or Creole. Where you've got big time restructuring as well.
No, I sort of mean it in a slightly bigger tent kind of way. But okay, thank you.
There's not much evidence, grammatical evidence. Yuko Otsuka has written a paper on supposedly grammatical syntactic resemblances between Niuean and East Polynesian, but I think most of her stuff is convergent developments rather than evidence of contact. I don't know. I may change my mind about some of it.
Okay, thank you.